And we are live. Hello and welcome to Sarah's B2B Live Lounge. And this week I have got the most wonderful guest all the way from Scotland. Welcome, David Penrick.
Hello, Sarah. Hello. Thank you very much for having me as a guest. I'm looking forward to having a chat, and it's good to be in the lounge.
Ah, yes, in the lounge, which used to be called the LinkedIn Live Lounge, but unfortunately we had to change the name.
The lawyers have a word. Yeah, they did that to me.
Actually, the lawyers didn't have a word, but various people said they might if you're not careful, Sarah.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay.
I've experience with that because I am the artist formerly known as Dr. LinkedIn. And LinkedIn didn't like that very much. So they just sent me a little polite note saying, take it away from your profile and please change your domain name. So, yeah.
Well, at least they sent you a polite note, David.
Yeah, they didn't sort of take the website down or get in touch with my web host or anything. They were quite nice about it, really. And I realized I was on slightly dodgy ground because, LinkedIn is a trademarked word. So you've got to be very careful how you use it. Anyway, not to worry. It's all in the past now.
We're all in the past. In fact, somebody messaged me the other day and said, why do people put, the TM next to LinkedIn whenever they write it? And I said exactly that. It is a trademark word.
It's part of the terms and conditions. I mean, in fact, I used Dr. LinkedIn and I used TM on the LinkedIn word, but they thought I was trying to trademark the whole term, the whole phrase. So that was the reason I think they got into it. I was doing some high profile events in London and Manchester. And I think someone in LinkedIn spotted it, and then it just goes through an escalation sort of thing. But
yes,
it gave me the opportunity to rebrand as the Doctor is in, rather than just working on the simple Dr. LinkedIn, which it was a simpler description, but the Doctor is in, I think, is slightly more intriguing for people. I got the idea actually from the Peanuts cartoon, when Lucy would give her psychological advice for 5 cents to Charlie Brown.
Oh, I remember that. And Charlie Brown used to kind of slump in front of her stand, didn't he?
Exactly. Yeah. And Lucy would give him words of wisdom. So that, and on the little stand that she had, it said the Doctor is in, and the in was quite like the LinkedIn logo with the IN.
It was. I wonder if she surely wouldn't. I think who wrote that? I'm trying to remember the name.
Charles Schultz, I think it is.
Schultz, that's it. I wonder if it was anything to do with LinkedIn. I doubt it very much.
Yeah.
So the Doctor is in, which I do like, and you're very well known as a doctor figure with your white coat.
Yeah, I'm not wearing my white coat today. I thought I'd be more casual for the lounge.
Yeah, yes. I wasn't sure whether you're going to be white coated or not. And you've adopted that and taken that. And the language that you use in your profile, where you talk about keeping a healthy profile and health checks, etc. So you're using medical language, and it's great branding, really. It's very powerful, and you've got it consistently all the way through your profile, and you really do stand out as the Doctor on LinkedIn. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think people understand the metaphor quite easily because you have a quite an intimate relationship with the Doctor, and you hopefully are looking at them as a sort of expert and a professional who's got your best interests at heart. And you come to them with problems, which they will solve for you through diagnosis, through medicine, through different treatments. Sometimes it's a short, simple treatment. Sometimes it's more long-term and more in-depth. But yeah, the metaphor works quite well, which I've used that consistently since about 2016. I think I started using the Dr. LinkedIn and then changed it in 2020 at the beginning of February, after my little polite lawyer's letter came through.
No, I think it's great. I mean, you've been teaching LinkedIn, training LinkedIn, helping people with their LinkedIn since 2016, which is a very long time.
Yeah, that's when I used the Doctor, but I was doing it before that from 2006. In fact, that's when I wrote my first profile for somebody in 2006, when LinkedIn was a very different looking beast. There were no profile photographs then. And it was very much just a question of having something more like a CV, which was quite static online. But at the same time, it had to be well written, it had to be engaging. And I'd written my first one for somebody, and they then were approached by somebody who said, "That's a really good profile. Can you write it for me?" And he said, "No, I can't, but I know somebody who can." And that's where I started to actually do that work, because I could see that there was demand for it, simply because people found a difficulty with describing themselves and being objective about describing themselves. And I think it's something that's still very much the case today. Even though people are much more used to an online environment, they still find difficulty in describing themselves to the outside world on paper, if you like. It's obviously a screen we're dealing with these days, but just writing about yourself is something that a lot of people have difficulty with. And where I succeed is where I have that objectivity in order to just tease things out of them, have a conversation with them, and then they're much better able to talk about themselves in a professional manner.
Absolutely. And I mean, I find exactly the same, is that when you talk to somebody and they talk to you, and there's no computer screen, there's no pen and paper involved, they're much freer with their words. And then taking their words, and you take their words and you kind of remold them a little bit so it makes sense to the audience. And then you show them to the client, and I bet they're amazed at what you come up with.
Yeah, I mean, often people say that they're astounded by what I'm saying about them, simply because they haven't described themselves in that way to themselves. They've only described themselves to me and revealed things to me. And I use my experience as a writer and as a journalist to turn it into a compelling story. And it's often the case when somebody else tells your story that you hear things about yourself and you perceive things about yourself that you maybe were only aware of subconsciously, but they're still there. And a lot of the psychology of writing about things is based on the ability that you have to be objective about something and not be too emotionally involved in it. And people, I mean, obviously sometimes you've got to be emotional and you've got to use stories that involve emotion when you're writing a profile. But I think sometimes people get too emotional about their businesses when they're running their own company, when they're a small business and they're in a startup mode. There are so many things to take into consideration, and often just talking about what you do is one of the less important things, when it should be probably one of the most important things, because you've got to get your message out there and you've got to tell people, this is what I do, this is the kind of people I help, and this is how I do it. Please come and talk to me.
That's brilliant. And touching on that, actually, I think people get so into and sort of swamped, if you like, by their own businesses and by what they're doing. And what you help them do is take a step back and look at it from a audience perspective, from a bird's eye view, if you like. And that's the language that needs to be on the profile, isn't it? Because it's people visiting the profile that really need that base knowledge. This is what we do, or I do. This is how we can help you. And I think people, as I say, too involved in their own businesses and they don't see it.
Yeah, it's a classic problem that you can't read the label of the jar you're in. It sounds slightly cutesy, but it's often the case that people just don't see how other people view them, and they don't also look at the category they're in or the category that they're trying to define. And then work within the confines of that, just to say, well, I'm doing this, but in a different way. There's a kind of management theory called blue ocean strategy, which I often use for people, particularly if it's someone who's looking for a new job, where you differentiate yourself from the red ocean, which is full of blood because everyone's saying the same thing and doing the same thing and competing for the same marketplace. But the blue ocean looks at a new marketplace and a new category, creating business for yourself, which is fundamentally changed from what other people are doing. And what often people are unaware of is the fact that if you start to use language in that way, then you start to create a new audience, which previously wasn't in existence. You create products and services which are new to people, which work in a different way with them psychologically because you use slightly different language to describe it. So it's often the case that that kind of thinking doesn't come into what you're doing when you're at the coal face of your business and focus hard on getting things done and surviving and getting your cash flow right, getting your marketing right, getting your keywords right, deciding how you're going to market yourself, what channels you're going to use, which social media, there's so much to consider.
There is. Yeah.
And given that the only barrier to entry is an internet connection and a computer, there are so many more people all around the world competing with you in your business, much more than there ever have been at any time in history previously. There's much more competition out there, and you have to somehow be visible and survive.
Absolutely. And you mentioned keywords, actually. So let's touch on those for a second. Mm-hmm. We were talking about these before as well. So what are keywords? What, people say to me, what do you mean? What do you mean by keywords?
Well, the keywords are basically, if you do a search in Google, you're using keywords. You're looking for something and you're looking for the answer to something. And when I talk about keywords with people, I'm using the same metaphor as the Google search, because LinkedIn is just a big search engine. There's over 1 billion profiles on LinkedIn, 1 billion people. And somehow you've got to be found. And nobody knows your name when you start out. They're not thinking, oh, David Petherick, oh, Sarah Clay, I'll do a search for them. And you come up first because you've got a nicely optimized profile. People don't know who you are or what you're offering. So you've got to use keywords in your profile. And one of the most important places you should place those keywords is in your headline. Because if you say, I'm a LinkedIn profile writer, then people will be familiar with that as a kind of, that's what you want from me. That's what, the service I provide is that. A LinkedIn profile doctor is slightly too cutesy. People don't know that. That's my branding. That's my name. But what people are looking for, the product they're looking for, is a LinkedIn profile writer or a LinkedIn profile author or a LinkedIn profile editor. These are the kind of phrases that they tend to use. So my headline and also my job titles, I have the benefit of running my own company, therefore I can choose my own job titles. And what I've done with my profile is I've given myself 4 or 5 different jobs, all using different keywords in the job title. And that is heavily indexed by LinkedIn search engine. So if somebody does a search for LinkedIn profile writer or LinkedIn expert speaker, then my profile is more likely to come up in the search results simply because I've placed that information into my profile. It's not the only place that's important to do it, but the headline is a key one. And people often have much too short a headline. They don't use the 220 characters that are available to them, which they can populate with keywords. They can put in the geography of the area they work with. They can specify who they work with. They can talk about how many followers they have. They can even put in a phone number or an email address. It's maybe slightly over the top to do that in my view, but your headline is the most important element in using keywords on LinkedIn, and far too few people are using it effectively.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we were talking about how your headline goes everywhere with you on LinkedIn. That first, where it's 30 to 40 characters, isn't it? It varies, but everywhere you go on LinkedIn, a part of your headline goes with you, and that's the first thing that people see about you. So I agree 100%, and it's such a missed opportunity for many people not utilizing their headlines. And
it's the most important thing.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, it's the most important thing. And you might have only, the estimates vary, but let's take 7 seconds as a kind of rough time period for which somebody's going to look at your profile for the first time. They're going to spend 7 seconds deciding whether or not it's worth spending more time with you. And in that 7 seconds, you've got to do a lot of work. You've got to have a compelling photograph. You should be using a background header image, which is relevant to your business and talks about maybe key points that your business offers. And your headline has to say, this is what I offer, this is who I offer it to, this is how it helps you. So that they're thinking, I have that issue, I have that problem, so maybe you can help me with it. And they're going to engage further with you. They're going to connect with you. They're going to send you a message. They're going to look at your website. They're going to phone you. They're going to email you. You want to be starting conversations with the right kind of people. and you only have a very limited amount of time to do that. The profile doesn't do all of the work on its own. It's your comments on LinkedIn, your expertise demonstrated through how you're writing articles or helping people with their issues and being a good citizen, essentially, on LinkedIn. That is a very important part of building your credibility. I have a kind of 3-part mantra to what I try to do with people on LinkedIn, which is to make them visible, legible, and credible. And the credibility is the hardest part because that's what you have to earn. It's not given. You can be very visible by using keywords and by structuring your profile correctly. You can be very legible by writing clearly and describing what you do in a very straightforward and unambiguous way. But the credibility is the key factor that will make people want to do business with you because they see that you're a credible operator. They see that you're an honest person. They see that you're a kind person. And they see that you have deep expertise in your subject matter that you're talking about, that you're dealing with in your business.
Absolutely. I love that. I've just retyped it in the chat. Visible, legible, and credible. I think they're 3 really important things. And actually that's the right order, isn't it? Kind of thing. And you're absolutely right. When somebody feels that what you say in your headline aligns with them, that's the first contact point, and then the relationship will build. But on the other aspect, if somebody sees your headline and there's no way that they ever will require your services or your goods or anything that you have to say, then they're not going to bother. And so you're saving their time and yours by saying them, this is what I do. And actually you and I are never, ever going to,
it's important to as much to include people as to exclude people from your potential customer base, because if you have people constantly trying to contact you who are looking for something that is inexpensive and you're expensive, or if they're looking for something that's simple and yours is complex, or if they're looking for something that is pink and yours is green, you don't want to be talking to these people and wasting your time and their time in that conversation. You need to be dialing things in as well as dialing things out, and your headline and your about section are where you can do that most effectively. So you can actually say, this is who I work with, this is the focus that I have. It doesn't exclude people. And it's very important to kind of realize that it's good to have a niche and have a speciality. I mean, you, for example, specialize in dealing with kind of corporate clients and companies and helping them with their engagement and their employee advocacy. That's what you're known for, and that's what you say in your headline, and it's throughout your profile. So it's very clear for people, this is what Sarah does, and they can make a decision based on that and say, oh yes, this is for me, this looks good, let me explore this further with her. At the same time, people who are looking for something different will look at your profile and say, oh, that's not relevant for me, so I should look for someone else to help me with what I'm doing. If they want someone to write their profile, they would maybe come to me rather than come to you, because that's my expertise, that's my core activity that I do. And I try to make that clear in my profile, just as much to exclude people as to include people in my potential client. It's very much the case that you should be careful about how broad your offering is, because if you try to please everyone, you kind of end up pleasing nobody.
Absolutely. And I think people can be very fearful of that, of niching or niching, as they say in the States, into one particular area. I'm going to pause because we have had some amazing comments from my very good friend, Gabe Leal. Hello, Gabe. Thank you very much for joining us. So Gabe's said lots of interesting things here, and Gabe is coming on to the show, actually. Is it next week or the week after? No, it's not next week, because there isn't a show next week because I'm away. But Gabe is coming onto the show. What he's seeing on a networking platform, your profile is essentially your elevator pitch to prospective clients, customers, and business owners. Boom, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly that. Yeah, definitely.
It's got to do its job very quickly. It's even more brutal than an elevator pitch because it's shorter. The amount of time somebody spends looking at your profile when they land on it can be desperately short. The job you have to do is to make sure that your profile engages the right kind of person in order for them to say, I should be talking to this person. I should be starting a conversation with them. I should be connecting or looking at the material online, looking at their content, following them at the very least, in order to just start that process of getting to know them, because it's a network, as you said, and a network works through connections and through reputation and through repeating yourself and being consistent about what your message is and what your language is and how it's used. That's how people get to know you for a particular area of expertise. And the number of people who are ready to buy when they land on your profile is very small. But the number of people who are potentially going to buy from you once they get to know you better and once they have a better indication of your expertise and your knowledge is a much larger slice of the pie. And
Yes.
often people forget that people are not ready to buy straight away, but you've got to develop a relationship with them over time. And if somebody, for example, is changing jobs, they might not be doing that straight away, but they might be doing it 3 or 4 years down the line. And at that point, they'll think, oh, David can write a profile. He can maybe help me to get that new position because I'm looking for something new and I'm ready for it now. A lot of people tend to make the mistake of assuming that the buying moment is immediate and is straightforward, and they launch into kind of pitch on the first connection, which inevitably leads to disappointment because people are not ready for that. They'll back off and say, "Oh, I don't really want to buy it right now. I'm interested and I'm curious about it, but I don't want to buy it right now. I don't have a need right now."
Exactly. So please don't ram it down my throat. I want to get to know you. And then I'll see if I'm ready to buy from you. And actually, the other thing that happens on LinkedIn, and I know Gabe sees this as well, is referrals happen. So I'll get a message from somebody and they'll say, well, so-and-so, who I know on LinkedIn suggested you as somebody I could work with. And that's because somebody else has seen my messaging and then they've been approached to say, do you know anybody who does X, Y, Z? Yes, I do, because I saw her post this morning. And so it's really important that we are out there on LinkedIn telling everybody what we do and how we can help them.
Sure. And that's not just the job of your profile. That's the job of your posts and your comments and your content and your articles. You've got to be out there continuously and obviously be visible to people as much as possible, as often as possible, without boring them into submission, as it were. There's a limit to how many posts you can do in a day without getting people who are slightly annoyed and switching you off and just saying, I don't want any notifications very much.
Yes, absolutely. We could go into post cadency in great depth, but let's stick with profiles, I think, today.
Yeah,
and it's one of the things I wanted to ask you, David, because you've been writing profiles for a very long time, and writing people's profiles is not something that I do at all. I help people write their own, but I don't write them for them. But what's interesting about how you work is you will write people's profiles from all different sectors and for all different purposes. So, for example, if you have a business owner will come to you, or a CEO will come to you and say, could you help me write my profile or write my profile? But you also work with job seekers, for example, don't you? And I'm interested to find out what's the difference in the process, or the difference in what a job seeker should be saying from, let's say, a CEO or an entrepreneur.
Well, for job seekers, you're the product and you need to sell yourself. So the profile has got to be much more about your qualities in a working environment and much more emphasis on your skills, your soft skills, your hard skills, and your experience. If you're an entrepreneur, the main focus of your profile is that it's got to talk about more about the pain points that your target audience has and how you offer a solution to that, which may be a service or a product. You need much more to establish your credibility in both situations, as a job seeker and as an entrepreneur. But the focus for an entrepreneur is much more on establishing your credibility through things like recommendations and creating useful, insightful posts and content and writing articles that are educational and informing and, also entertaining. You've got to be an entertainer at the same time as educating people. You're not going to bore them into submission. And often people in B2B does not mean boring to bored. You can use much more language. much more interesting language and inject humor, energy, and character into writing. And using audio, using video to talk about yourself and to talk about your business, to engage your audience more effectively. Job seekers are a different type of process that I go through. The interview process is slightly different from a business to business. And very often what I will do when I'm writing for an individual who's looking for a new job is I'll go back in time to find out the skills that they have that they may have used sometime in the past, but they're not using at the moment, because a lot of the skills that the people are looking for nowadays, you can use up to 100 skills in your profile now. And the LinkedIn recruiter product, often what they'll do is they'll load in a certain number of skills that the candidate must have on their profile. So if you miss out any of those, you're not going to be on the short list or the long list. But the skills are much more at play in a job seeker environment, and also the way that you articulate them. You can articulate up to 5 skills now associated with your about section, and you can also articulate any number of skills with each experience that you've had, which each job that you've had. So there's much more of an emphasis on skills when I'm writing for a job seeker than when I'm writing for an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, it's more about a product or service, and therefore the skills that might be used use a different psychology, use a different language, basically. But the processes also are similar to each other in that what you're trying to do is to distill things down to the essence of the most important things that you say first, so that people come away with a clear impression of what the expertise is of an individual, or what the service or product is all about for a business-to-business proposition.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No. And I like the way that you've delineated the two, and it is quite different. You're absolutely right. And I think from a job seeker's perspective, because I do work with students actually, which is one of my things I love doing, working at universities and helping students write their profiles. But I always say to them, it's less about the content, I think, when you're a job seeker. It's more about the profile and finding companies that you want to work with and sort of trying to connect with people more directly. Whereas, as you quite rightly said, the entrepreneur, it is a lot about the content as well. I actually want to take a couple of steps back. You were talking earlier about in your experience section, you've got various roles to enable you to put more keywords in. Now, I think this is a really great trick, and I didn't know this until I'd been on LinkedIn for a little while. And it's a really, really cool trick but it's a very neat way, I think, of setting up your profile. Can you talk us through that?
Yes. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, you're running your own business, or you're part of a small business and you have a particular role within that, describing yourself as managing director XYZ company is not very useful, because nobody knows what XYZ company does yet. Your name obviously is important, and your title is important to some extent, but what's much more important is to describe the kind of issues you deal with and the kind of problems you solve, and to use the kind of keywords that people are going to be finding you in a search where they don't know your name, they haven't come across you before. So in terms of having a company page and having an associated job which is linked to that company page, what you can do in essence is say to yourself, well, I have more than one role within the company. Typically for a small business owner, they're wearing multiple hats. They're the CEO, they're the chief cook and bottle washer. They're doing all sorts of different things. They're responsible for marketing, they're responsible for sales, they're responsible for service delivery, they're responsible for product care. Everything is coming under one umbrella, and it's one person that's typically dealing with it. But what you can do when you want to be found and be more visible on LinkedIn is to have a number of different jobs within that one company. So the job where you describe yourself as managing director, to give yourself some sort of authority and say, well, you know, if you speak to me, you're speaking to the boss, is fine. And you can describe what you do there and your role and your responsibilities within that job and how you can help people there. But what you can also do is you can describe the problem that you solve in your job title, because that's more likely to be found in a search. And
Mhm.
so if you look at my profile, for example, on LinkedIn, I'm not suggesting it's the best profile in the world, but what I've done is
It's pretty good, folks, I'll tell you that.
I've got a number of different jobs which I've given myself, one of which is saying free profile reviews. I offer people a free 10-minute kind of profile x-ray to say, this is what's good about your profile, this is how you can improve the profile, and also just to get to know people. I don't want to be jumping into trying to sell to them straight away. So I still have that one day a week. I do free sessions, and they'll take me all over the world sometimes. It's great fun doing them, and it's a very fast-paced environment. But the core element that I always come back to when I'm looking at the job title is the fact that in my one, I've got a job title which says LinkedIn expert speaker, because I like to speak and I want more people to be aware of that and to hire me to come and talk to their audiences. I also have another one which says LinkedIn profile writer, because that's a more common search term. LinkedIn profile doctor is a relatively obscure, and nobody knows me until they come across the brand or they come across the website that the doctor metaphor is in play. But they will do searches for common things like LinkedIn profile writer, and by having that text in the job title, that's more heavily indexed by the LinkedIn search engine, and therefore I appear more in the results.
Perfect. Yeah. So basically you've got 3 or 4 jobs within the same company, which is your
Yes.
company, and you're just highlighting all the different elements of the work that you do, because
And
as you said,
I'm talking about them, and I have a link or a couple of links which are relevant to that specific role. So I'll take them to a specific page on my website rather than just to the home page. I'll take them to a specific product or service, and I will describe that for them. I mean, for example, I'll say I'm writing profiles for CEOs and for VPs and senior vice presidents within an organization. That's a slightly different language and different approach to someone who's looking for a new job. That's a slightly different approach to somebody who's in a business-to-business environment, and therefore the job titles that I have under the umbrella of that one company vary, as does the content to talk about that specific role and how I serve that specific audience. So by being slightly schizophrenic, you're addressing different niche markets. So you can have more than one niche that you can serve by having more than one job title at the same company.
it's brilliant. It's a really good tactic. And I liked that when you said you send people directly to a landing page on your website rather than to the home page, because then it's another click to get through to the right thing. And to make that customer journey quicker and easier is going to help them get to know you better and quicker, isn't it?
Sure. And some of the links will simply be the ones that go straight to my appointment booking system, where they can choose a date in the diary and say, okay, let's have a chat.
Yeah, I love
Another
that.
thing,
I open my diary and there's somebody in there, some random person who's just clicked through to a link and booked in. And I think it's a really nice feeling that somebody's made that effort to want to talk to you.
yeah. And the other thing about the way that you use different job titles within one company is the fact that people will light upon the one that interests them most and read that. They're not going to read everything in your profile. So by guiding them to it, by having these different job titles, people can scroll through it and then they'll say, oh, that's the one that appeals to me, and they'll read that description. So you're basically slicing and dicing for your audience, and you're saying, okay, if you're a CEO, this is the section that's relevant to you. You don't need to worry about spend time or waste your time spending time looking at the other sections. You can just look at this section.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody that's looking for a speaker, then this will take you to my speakers page, and you can see more information that's relevant to that. Look at the kind of audiences that I've been speaking to in the past and get an idea of the kind of approach that I have. So rather than just having one size fits all and taking everyone to the homepage of your website, the same way, what you can do is you can take people to a specific landing page within your website, and you can talk about a specific product or service or niche that you're serving within that specific job title.
Yeah. It's a bit like, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of crisps, or as we call them, potato chips.
Yeah.
And you can buy a selection pack with all the different flavors in their own individual packets, and you're going to go straight for the flavor that you like, and you're going to enjoy that, and that's relevant, as opposed to a pack when you've got all the flavors mixed together and you're picking one and going, oh no, I don't like that one, oh that's the one I like. And it just makes everything so much easier and clearer if it's all in little segments, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key to doing it. And the
Yeah.
beauty of having your own business and you being in charge of things is you can describe yourself in whatever way you wish to in order to address a specific audience. So if you work with large businesses and you also work with small businesses, you can write content that deals with the issues that a large business have, which may be irrelevant to a small business. And in the same way, you can talk about the issues that are relevant to a small business, which will be irrelevant to that large business.
Yeah.
So you can serve both markets, and they will hopefully land on the right one when they're looking at your profile because you've structured it and you've made the language clear enough. There's always the difficulty of deciding which one to put first and which order to put it.
Absolutely.
The key
Yes.
to that is just to experiment and to try things out and see what works. And if you find it's not quite landing properly, then mix it up and change it a little bit. I do that quite regularly
Yeah.
in my
And
profile.
actually, that's something I'm really aware of the time because we are over time already. But hey, um, we'll wrap this up in a second. But I do have one more question for you. But the other thing about profiles is to change them sometimes. You know, I think people are quite frightened to switch their profile around. And I always notice whenever I go to my profile and just make a change or add something, take something away, whatever, my profile views go up
Yeah.
whenever
Yeah.
we tweak things and change things around. And I think it's a really nice way of keeping our audiences informed as to what we're doing now. And it's so easy to do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not set in concrete, it's completely fluid and you can change it at the drop of a hat. What I'm doing today is quite different from what I was doing 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. The essence of what I'm doing is still the same, is helping people to make themselves understood online and specifically within the parameters of LinkedIn profile. But the techniques I'm using and the kind of packages of help that I'm offering people have evolved over time. And I've tried things out, and sometimes they've worked, and sometimes they've just gone down like a lead balloon. People have said, "No, not interested in that whatsoever." Um,
We've all had those.
and you learn through experimentation. And the great thing about LinkedIn is you can always be experimenting. You can always be trying new things. You can change your headline, see how that works. If it doesn't have the desired effect, you can change it again. You can change the content of your profile. You can change your profile photograph. You can change the headline. You can change the header image behind your photograph.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything can be changed. You can even change your URL on LinkedIn so that your professional URL address has your name and may also have your product or service as part of the keywords, because
Yeah.
again, that can be useful in terms of search visibility, not just within LinkedIn, but outside of LinkedIn. For Bing and search engines like Google, they index the content that's in LinkedIn. And by using things creatively and changing things and mixing things up, you can be making sure that you're still staying relevant to an audience or discovering a new audience and then being able to double down on that and say, yes, this is the audience I'm working with. This is how I can help you. But everything is fluid. Everything can be changed very quickly. And you get immediate response to what works and what doesn't work. If you see your number of views in your profile going up, the number of inquiries going up, the number of visits to your website going up, you know you're doing things right. And if it isn't working, try something else.
Yeah.
It's endlessly variable. And the worst thing you can do is keeping it the same when things aren't working. If things
Mm,
aren't working, it's time to change things up and mix things up a little bit.
absolutely.
And the most important thing I could always say to people, if they're thinking about hesitating about changing their profile in any, profound way, is forget it, just do it, just go for it and see what happens. You can
Yeah.
always go back to the version that you had before. And if you're happy with the version that you have at the moment, there's no compelling reason to change it. But you still have to bear in mind the fact that you've got to be an interesting subject for people's attention, and therefore you have to be innovating and you have to be changing things. You have to be looking at the competitive landscape that you're working within. Any business is working within a competitive background, and there are always people who are trying to do what you're doing in a slightly different way, doing it in the same way but cheaper, doing it in the same way but faster, having a slightly different approach to what they're doing, or serving different geographical areas. All of these things are in flux all of the time, and you can adjust your profile to match that. I mean, I do quite a lot of work in North America with clients there, simply by making myself available at certain times of day. It means that it's convenient for them to speak to me one-to-one, and I can even schedule calls, and I have some of my packages I'm available on a Sunday when most people are generally not working in a Western environment anyway. That's not a work day. It's quite different in the Middle East because that's the beginning of the week.
Good point. Yes. Yeah. Great. David, this has been absolutely amazing. And we are over time. I hope nobody minds. But I have one final question for you, which is the crunch question I ask all of my guests. Can you give 3 tips for our audience who are either watching live or who are listening on the podcast? 3 tips that they can take away today.
Okay, 3 tips. The first one is get a professional headshot. It's worth investing in a very good photograph of yourself, because a photograph will last you for years, and it's the only version of you that people might ever meet. So get a really good headshot. If you can't afford to hire a professional photographer, then most people have got camera phones which have got very high quality lenses in them, and they will be able to take a good photograph if you just get the framing right and get a neutral background, natural lighting, and a smile on your face. So that's probably the most important thing, I think, is a good headshot. The second thing I would say, second tip, is to rework your headline, so that if somebody doesn't know you or your business, when they read their headline, they should know exactly what you do, what problem you solve, and who you solve it for. Assuming that they're never going to read the rest of your profile, your headline has to do that elevator pitch that was talked about earlier. It has to get that message across. The third thing I think is most important is to be creative about your about section, because that's your introduction. That's your elevator pitch in more detail. It's got up to 2,600 characters, 400 words roughly. Tell a story there, address the pain points that your audience has and how you provide a solution. Have a call to action, clear contact details, because some people might want to call you, other people want to email you, other people want to look at your website, other people just simply want to connect with you or follow you in order to start the conversation. But the about section is probably the most important part, apart from your headline. So good professional headshot, rework your headline so that it's instantly clear what you do and how you help people, and tell me a story in your about section so that I'm interested, but make sure you have a call to action at the end and clear contact mechanisms in it.
Because people forget, people don't realize, do they? Often they get to the end of reading something and they think it's really interesting, but sometimes they just need that little nudge, don't they?
Yeah, just a little nudge to say, let's now start a conversation, and let's do it, and let's engage with each other, because that's what your profile is there to do, is there to start conversations with the right kind of people. And if it doesn't do that, well, you've wasted a lot of time and energy on something.
Absolutely, because the opportunity is there, and LinkedIn have given us all of this space. There's your 220 characters in your headline, 2,600 in your about section. That's a lot of, it's a lot of words we're allowed to talk about ourselves and how we help other people. So maximize the opportunities, definitely.
Yep. And just remember that you're talking to an individual rather than to a group of people. I often find that people make that mistake, and they don't address themselves one-to-one. Somebody's looking at your profile. It's a one-to-one relationship. One person is looking at one person's profile. So you have an intimate relationship with somebody. So the language you use should be one-to-one. And please don't use a third person in your about section. It's pompous, it's anachronistic, and it just doesn't land right at all. that
it doesn't.
one.
I think people don't realise that it's a mistake, because often I see them a lot. So, written, John is this, John does that, John did this, and I might say, you might want to switch that. Oh, I had no idea, and they really genuinely didn't realise that wasn't what you do. And I think maybe they're stuck way back when LinkedIn started, when it was more of a sort of let's plop our CV here and see what happens kind of place, where it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, a CV generally tends to use passive language and uses the third person, even if it's implied rather than specific, just because of the nature of the English language. Anyway, you can write something which doesn't appear to be either in the first person or the third person. But it always sounds incredibly boring when you do that. So I would recommend you just speak in the first person as if you were having a conversation with somebody face to face.
Because it is, as you've said you said several times today, this is the beginning of the conversation. This is the beginning of the relationship.
You want to start the conversation with the right kind of person by guiding them through your content to say, this is how I can help, this is who I can help, this is what I offer. And if that all resonates with that person looking at your profile, you've just got to make sure you ask them to get in touch with you and to start that conversation. But just to be as simple as just mentioning it at the last line of your about section, saying, I welcome new connections on LinkedIn, or please email me at this address. And then that can take things further. But I always think it's good to have, for a business, it's good to have the option of saying, here's my website, even if it's not a clickable link, here's the website address, here's the phone number, here's the email that you can get in touch with. Here's a free giveaway that I have for you, which will help you in some way. You just want to be taking that conversation from the casual viewer of your profile to the interested inquiry or the interested conversation or the start of something, even if they're just following you on LinkedIn. It's a great platform for networking, but the common mistakes that I see people making on it are that they're not asking for that simple connection. They're not asking for that conversation to start, and not making it easy for that conversation to start. Job seekers are particularly bad at doing things where they'll say, they're looking for a new job, but they don't have an email address in their contact information section.
Yeah.
So, it's fine if you're using a recruiter product and you want to get in touch with somebody, you can reach out with an email, but not everyone is using that product. And it's often the case that I'll see profiles and they're simply not making it easy to get in touch. And for a B2B environment, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. You should make it as easy as possible and have as many relevant channels as possible open to people so they can communicate with you in the way that they feel most comfortable doing. But the key thing is you want to start that conversation, and LinkedIn profile is a great place to do that.
It is. David Petherick, I could sit and chat with you all day, but we need to finish.
We have to stop at some point. We've been banging on for...
We could go on and on forever. This has been wonderful. It's been a really, really great conversation. We've touched on so many things, and I've tried to keep it all around the profiles, because we could go off on all kinds of tangents. But thank you so much for being my guest on the B2B Live Lounge today. I have one question, very tricky one, this.
Yes.
Where can we find you?
Just search for my name, David Petherick, and you'll find me. LinkedIn. You also find, I've got a ridiculously short and simple website domain, which is doc.scott. DOC.
Oh, I love that. Yes, doc.
Scottish doctor. But if you Google my name, you'll find my profile.
It's like these 3 words, isn't it? Doc.scott.
You can connect on LinkedIn. You can find my profile, and obviously it will be visible to people with my name there. When I do a Google search for my name, I tend to populate the top 10 results quite readily because I've got a relatively unusual surname. So it's very easy to find me.
It is great. Thank you so much. So, folks, next week there won't be a B2B Live Lounge because I will be cycling across the Alps. What a mad thing to do. But the following week, which is the 26th of September 2024, I have my lovely guest who's been joining us today, Gabe Leal, who has a very interesting profile on LinkedIn that I'm very excited to talk about. So, but David Petherick, thank you so much for being my guest today on the B2B Live Lounge.
Thank you, Catherine.